What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Clap Your Hands podcast, brought to you by Odyssey Sports, brought to you by Sports Radio 94 WIP. Make sure you download that Odyssey app. You get all the episodes first. And Kyle, boy, oh boy, oh boy.
I can just see it on your face.
Yeah, first, good morning. Good morning. We always, before we do this, we pick a title for the pod of what we're going to call it for the live stream. And, it's not always where the pod goes. It's kind of where we think we're going to go. And today, I think it's pretty clear where this pod is going to go. Last night after the game, I went out and there was a bunch of Sixers fans and they're all saying the same thing. Everybody's feeling the same way. James Harden, man, like what in the world was that from James Harden? I can accept if you're going to miss a ton of shots, it is like it's a make or miss league. If you are going to just have an off night, whatever. But those games where it just looks like you just want to almost take them and like shake them and be like, bro, let's go. Like, come on, let's go. This is an important game. He just looked checked out. He played poorly. And as you put it perfectly, and as the title says, James Harden turned into Ben Simmons last night.
Yeah, it's just one of those games where, look, I think he didn't have the same really downhill attacking mentality early, but he at least was, trying to get his. He's trying to score in some form or fashion. A little too much grifting and foul baiting and things like that. But all right, it's like, he can adjust to this. This is not an unsalvageable game. And then I don't know exactly when it started. Let's say midway through the second quarter, maybe a few minutes into the second quarter, he started running pick and rolls with Joel Embiid, and he would get to the paint, and Al Horford is dropping and dropping and dropping. And James has shots that he can take from mid-range or even layups in some instances as the game goes on. And his head is he's like looking down here, head to the floor, head to the corner, wherever it is. And it was staggering to watch him just look so shook out there. Like, that's the only way I can describe it, is he looked scared to try to attack. And look, for whatever flaws James Harden has as a player, you don't see that often. We've seen some stinkers in terms of misses a lot of shots, lots of turnovers, which I believe he had 5 of those last night to add on top of this poor performance. But he was just so indecisive and slow and timid that has a trickle-down effect on everybody else, because as we've talked about with Ben Simmons 1,000 times in Philadelphia, as we're seeing in that game with James Harden, when the guy who's running the offense is that passive and just uninterested in attacking the basket, it makes it much, much harder for everybody else on the team. You're not getting into your sets as quickly. The trickle-down effect is just enormous. And I cannot believe that just how many days? 4 days after game one, where James Harden comes out and scores 45 points and is just absolutely nuking every coverage the Celtics are throwing at him, we're talking about a guy who looked like he had a just complete mental breakdown on the floor on Friday night.
Yeah, and it literally feels like we're recording a pod after one of their games against the Hawks a few years ago. Like that description you said. I mean, there are some differences. He shoots threes. That's part of it, right? He actually shoots. Ben Simmons, for what it's worth, literally didn't shoot in that series. But at the end of the day, you're right. I mean, just watching him drive into the paint with no intention of scoring. Like the second he gets in there, you can see he's looking to the corners for three, or frankly, he just dribbles back out, right? It's exactly what Ben used to do. It's exactly what we used to criticize Ben for. The going into paint, jumping in the air, and figuring out what you're going to do once you get there in terms of, trying to get it out for threes. And were there times where he got good, that his teammates got good looks because of those threes last night? Yeah, there were. But at the end of the day, it felt like in the beginning, and we'll get into the MVP thing, because I do think I have a lot of opinions on that. But I do think early on, it felt like the whole offense was either Joel doing something amazing, or you're counting on McDaniels or Melton or Tucker to make a corner three. And look, I get that those are good shots, and I get they didn't get enough threes up in game two. But at the end of the day, you don't, and we've said this throughout the pod, whatever, you don't trade for James Harden so that he can just do what Ben Simmons did. It like that point blank period. Because at least Ben played defense, right? Like Harden's not giving you anything on that end. But no, I agree. I mean, it's the worst version of James Harden. It's the passive version. But why do you think this is happening? Why? Like, why? Is it physical? Is it because it's the schedule of not having 2 days off in between games? Because it doesn't look physical to me. It looks just like a unwillingness to kind of play the game he played in game one. I mean, I know he spoke to reporters last night. He did the whole, well, I know I'm making a smart basketball play, which also had a lot of Ben Simmons-ish qualities to that quote. Why do you think it's happening? Liz, why? I
So
mean, I don't know how else to ask it.
so speaking of that, there were maybe I wasn't even in the locker room when Harden
Mm,
talked because that was in the middle of Joel's press conference.
yeah.
And I think that was if they didn't plan it that way,
Oh, it's
then
intentional.
Joel just like really unintentionally took about 15 bullets for James Harden after that absolute disaster of a game.
Yeah.
And, great leadership from Joel on that front.
Earned the
I do
Rolex.
think some of it is probably physical, not all of it, but at least some of it. We're not seeing him show the extra gear, beating guys off the dribble. Like most of the time when he was getting to the paint, it was more because Boston kind of conceded it. They're just saying,
Yeah.
here, you can keep taking this space. They figured out that he didn't really want to attack them for much of that game. And, ended up being a winning gambit for them. Certainly, though, a big part of it is mental. Like that game is why there are so many people who just do not believe in James Harden as a playoff guy. Why we've had these conversations all season that he's having a great bounce back year, but he's got to do it in the playoffs, and that's what matters. And this is a legacy year and things like of that nature because this guy in big moments has done this before. This is
Yeah.
not the first time. Maybe stylistically, it's a little different. Where we saw it last year, Miami Game 6. He was very checked out of that game, but I didn't think that was like him getting to the paint and not looking at the rim. That was just him being uninvolved on offense as
Right.
on a general level. So this is almost a new level for Harden in terms of stinking it up in the playoffs. And
Nice. Nice.
there's a lot of conversation after the game amongst fans anyway, to the extent of why are we going to pay this guy in the
Yeah.
offseason, talking about the team. And look, like I can't really blame people after a performance like that. If he can only give you one, and it was an A plus game from Harden in game one, that's absolutely true. He was amazing, stole them that game. But if you get that, and then the rest of the series is like F minus level basketball, which is what that is. What the fuck is the point of keeping and paying this guy? He'll be making like you give him a max, he's gonna be making like $60 million in a
Yeah.
few years. You want to pay that guy that kind of money, knowing that this kind of performance is possible for him? I wouldn't if I was running a team. So I get why people want to go there. And look, it's why, as much as I dismiss the Vegas thing, and obviously it didn't impact him in game one, it's why he's never going to get the benefit of the doubt in those
Yeah.
situations because people always feel like the trap door is going to open, that he gives you a good performance and then the next game he just might be completely missing. He doesn't show up when it matters. And like, here's the worst part. There are a bunch of guys on the Celtics, maybe not as important to the Celtics as Harden is to the Sixers. But a guy like Marcus Smart shoots 5 for 15 in that game. Him trying to attack at any point for Boston was essentially a win for the Sixers. Like you would have taken that
Mhm.
every single time. Unfortunately for the Sixers, fortunately for Boston, Marcus Smart is capable of making plays in other ways and impacting the game in other ways. He's taking charges. He's getting offensive rebounds. He's playing tough defense on somebody. When James Harden isn't good on offense, he has fucking nothing to offer. He not only is a bad defender, he's an apathetic defender, and
Yep.
he's an apathetic rebounder, and he just does not care to put himself and his team in positions to try to win games through that way. And so that's the most infuriating thing about. I can live with guys having, weird moments and bad shooting efforts and whatever, but there's no conscious effort or choice made to try to correct it in another way. There never has been. And look, this deep in his career, I think it's safe to say there never will be. Unless
Yeah.
James Harden is a great offensive player, he does not bring anything to the table. Period.
So that was frustratingly perfectly said in the way that it's not what you want to hear after game 3. And I think that is what kind of my biggest emotional takeaway from the game was last night is just, I'm down there. The stadium, the Phillies are playing the Red Sox. It's like a beautiful day. Everyone's so excited. Joel's getting his MVP. It feels like this is going to be different. James had a great game 1. Joel wasn't great in game 2, but he got his rust out. And just to take all that and then to 5-6 minutes into the game to just have that feeling of, oh my God, here we go again. Like this is that exact feeling. Like all season, all the first round of the playoffs, the first round of Boston. I mean, the first game against Boston, it was, no, guys, this is going to be different. I promise you, this team's different. They try hard. They make comebacks. They shoot threes. Joel's better. James is playing great. All this stuff. It just felt like it completely popped and went up in the air. And all of a sudden, that all too familiar feeling of just like complete lack of faith. I mean, I bring it up on the pod often, but I think it's just so telling in this. I'm checking the live odds during the game. The Celtics were minus 900 to win in the second half when they were up 8 points. Nobody had faith they were going to win that game. Nobody. Like we can all pretend, like Sixers fans and say, no, they were only down 8. Maybe they'll come back. And I do think there were 3 or 4 moments where they get it to 4 or 6 and the Celtics get a loose ball or the Celtics get an offensive rebound or Harden had this like horrendous, they had it down to 2. Harden misses a 3-pointer. They score on the other end. Harden comes back. He misses a jumper. They get on the other end and he fouls Jaylen Brown for an and one. And it's like, that's it. The game's over. So we can all sit here and say, yeah, they had a chance. And you know what? Like the Celtics are one of the best, if not the best team in the league. And if this was the NBA finals, we'd feel different. But the reality is it is the second round. And that's the matchup that they drew. And just seeing it be, minus 900, minus 800, it's a complete punch in the gut of nobody believes this team is going to do it. Nobody does. And that's what I think the worst part about last night was. It was, yes, James was bad. And yes, like, the role players, didn't do much. And I think Maxey is getting some coverage by Harden here because he was not good, right? And he's someone that might get a max deal. But just the biggest part is how excited fans were and just the ultimate quick deflating feeling of Jesus Christ, man, it's happening again.
Yeah, so a couple things coming out of that. I've gotten lots of tweets and some emails from readers where essentially they said you put a lot of blame on James Harden, but this guy was bad and this guy was bad and this guy was bad. And putting like centralizing Harden in this story is not saying he's the only guy who played bad, right? To your point, the other 2 guys, one who's making a ton of money currently, the other's going to be making a ton of money in the near future in Harris and Maxey. Those guys gave you essentially nothing in that game.
Yeah.
Like Tobias Harris is in foul trouble, had 7 points on 6 shots, was just bad and irrelevant for most of the game.
Yeah.
Tyrese Maxey was the other way where he took way too many shots, missed the open ones he had, and then he's trying to score over 3 people in the paint, taking these ridiculous runners and floaters that recycle the ball, make the easy pass, make the plays that Boston made all night where guys are collapsing the defense and then with multiple people on them, they're just finding the open shooter, whoever that is,
Yeah.
and trusting that somebody else is going to make a play. But the reason that James Harden is the headline and the story is because this guy is a first ballot Hall of
He's
Famer,
James Harden. Like, what are we doing here?
top 75 player of all time.
Yeah.
Former MVP, scored 45 fucking points in game 1. I have, you have, we all collectively have much higher expectations for James Harden than Tobias Harris. Like, we can't do anything. The Sixers
Right.
can't do anything. The fan base can't do anything about how much money Tobias Harris makes at this point. That's been set in stone for a long, long time. But James Harden is a star player. The entire reason you even build a roster around multiple stars is because you know the other guys are going to have down nights in the playoffs. Like it just happens. That's how it goes. Role players are role players for a reason. And that effect is compounded in these games where the pressure is up, the opponent is better, the shot quality is lower, so on and so forth. So, absolutely, Tobias, bad. Tyrese, bad. Almost everybody in the rotation, bad,
Yeah,
except
besides
for Joel
PJ.
Embiid,
And
quite
PJ was
frankly.
PJ was
PJ was okay.
yeah,
Melton was okay. I mean, frankly, fucking George Niang, who
I know. I
75% of
know.
the fan base doesn't want to play and should be out of the
Right.
rotation, was one of their only guys who had a chance to score in the second half last night. So, like, when you're in that position, what the hell is any James Harden has to take you home or help take you home with Joel Embiid, and he was a no-show in that game.
Well, and I think there's such an important distinction to make. Nobody is saying that James Harden has to be game one James Harden. He does not have to score 45 points, but he cannot be this James Harden. Like, yes, other people have to step up if Harden's not playing well. And frankly, I'm so over the complaining about Tobias Harris. Like, he is what he is. He's the fourth option on the team. To all of a sudden ask him to step up and make up for James Harden play is frankly unfair at this point. He's not been asked to do it all year. It is what it is, whatever, right? But ultimately, if Harden's going to give you a C level game, then maybe you can point and go, all right, Maxey, you need to be a little bit better, or other guys have to step up. But if Harden is giving you an F level game, I mean, it's to make a football analogy. It's like if the offensive line is playing poorly, I can't sit here and blame AJ Brown. Like at the end of the day, James Harden is Joel's the center of the team. Joel's the best player. But James Harden is such an integral piece of making the machine go that if it's functioning at such a poor level, it's hard for anybody else to play well because the whole thing is so disjointed. And that's what I think stood out last night too. And I'll blame Doc for this. Like they looked bad on defense early on. The Celtics were getting whatever shots they wanted, wide open 3-pointers. And on offense, it looks like they've completely forgotten how they played all season. I know Joel missed 2 games, but they look disjointed in game 2. I think that early on in game 1, I feel like they've lost their identity. I don't even know what they're trying to accomplish on offense. And that's not all on Doc. That is absolutely on Harden and the players too. But if I'm going to praise Doc for the team trying hard and, all these things, they looked awful last night. They came out last night and looked awful right away. So ultimately, it's everybody, but it's Doc too. I mean, the whole thing was just a complete disaster.
So I think we've gone too long without getting to Joel and kind of discussing the whole night for him at this point. Um, Joel, the saddest part about last night to me, Joel after the game is running through all sorts of questions. As like the only guy who actually sat and talked to anybody at length, which is just, on brand. He's the only guy who showed up for the game, the only guy who really talked after the game. He essentially said he's asked about the whole MVP hoopla and the ceremony and what have you. And he said that, and I agree with him. He thought that he handled it well, like had the emotions out, but he didn't play emotionally, like let the game
Mhm.
come to him. And I thought that was true. And then he goes on to say, like, he wished that they did this at like a different time, like the week between the playoffs and now. And for a guy to have like that cool of a moment where I think even people who dislike Joel, other fans, even people within this fan base, national writers who can't admit their biases, whatever,
Yeah. Yeah.
they probably watched Joel prior to that game go through his whole speech, bring out his son, break down emotionally, and said,
Yeah.
"Man, what a cool moment for this guy to have like this whole journey, having his parents there and Luke Bamute, who essentially made it so that he could have a basketball career by helping get him to the states, like."
Yeah.
Oh, really, really cool. And for Joel to come out of that game and essentially that like that moment and that atmosphere that he was in and say something like that to me is the most dispiriting thing about the entire game. Cause that should be, and I hope it still is a moment that Joel remembers forever. Like watching his son
Yeah.
run to him as he is crowned the best player from this season. But like Man, that is just a real gut punch if you're somebody in the organization or somebody on his team to hear him say that after that
Yeah.
game has to just sting.
Well, so I'll say this, like, I look, Joel is allowed to feel how he feels about wanting to move it, and I understand his point. And I think you're so spot on that all those players, like James, you can buy Joel a Rolex, and everyone can like chant MVP at him. But where he needed you was last night to make sure his moment was not ruined. But I am happy Joel got that moment last night, and I'm happy they did it the way they did it because frankly, this season might be going down the drain, and I'm happy that that moment happened for Joel because he deserved it. So I just thought the whole thing was the most beautiful moment I've ever seen in a sporting event with my own two eyes. Like when Arthur runs out and Joel didn't just break down in tears, like he completely let loose. It wasn't just a tear or two and let me wipe it away. The second he saw Arthur, he literally has full face crying. And it was beautiful and he deserved it. And the atmosphere in the arena was crazy. I mean, the only thing I can compare it to, and you were obviously there last night too, so you can speak on it, but it was one of the most emotionally charged arenas I've ever been in. I was at the Super Bowl in 2017 when they ran out onto the field to Dreams and Nightmares, and it was the same exact feeling of this is a moment, the chills you get, like the emotional energy of what's about to happen. It was comparable to that Super Bowl moment. So I mean, I can just speak for me. I almost feel like it took me 20 minutes to kind of come down from that moment. Like I felt emotionally drained from it. I can't imagine having to go play basketball. And I'm not making excuses because Joel handled it great, but it's just so deflating that Joel gets that amazing, beautiful moment. And it's not even him that comes out poorly. It's the team. It's the team. And yeah, so they fall behind right away, and it just never felt, they keep it to 7 or 8 points all the time, but it never felt like they were going to get over that hump. And it just really, really sucks that Joel lost. Like Iverson, when he got MVP in game 5, he had an amazing game. He scored 52 points. They won the game. Joel had an amazing game too. They just didn't win. And I really do hope you're right that when he looks back, he doesn't remember this night poorly because he deserves that moment so much. Like anyone that watched that, you can't hate on Joel anymore. Like that was such a beautiful Philly sports moment. I'm happy he got it.
Yeah, so he was very good in that game after that. Like I was very as we've talked about, I was concerned that we were going to get emotional Joel during the game where
Yep.
he just strays too far toward the side of, playing out of control. But he didn't. Like I thought that was a real sign of maturity from him that, after that early, they're down what, like 14-4. He still,
Yeah.
kept composed, stayed where he needed to be. I thought his rim protection was awesome early in that game. It really is striking to me. It doesn't even really look like he's hurt for most
No,
of the
at
time. Like
all.
I,
He
I think
looks
you
fine.
can see the conditioning isn't all there.
Mhm.
That second half of game so far, he's looked tired as it gets deeper into a game. Which, by the way, they have an afternoon game Sunday, which is just a disaster for them in terms of
Yeah, it is.
recovery.
Yep.
Joel for his injury, Harden for whatever the hell is going on with him mentally and physically. But that was a game from Joel that's good enough to go win that game. He was good on the glass, good at the rim, good enough attacking. Like, yeah, he didn't score 35 and his efficiency was just okay. But like that's about the level of performance that I expect
Yeah.
from Joel to try to win games that in this current state and to get so little from everybody else. Like, here's the thing, too. I don't even know if you're Doc Rivers, what are the changes that you make to try to right this ship? Like, you could play Shake Milton or Daniel House Jr. And mix it up, but like, I don't think either of those guys is like, oh man, that guy's coming in and
No.
swinging the series and he's going to hit 5 threes or whatever. Like that's part of the argument for playing a guy like Niang. Niang, for all his issues, at least he can like get hot and he might put you on a run that
Yeah.
sends you in the right direction. Like Shake and House, you're essentially just hoping for like competent two-way play, if that, from because Shake is kind of like back and forth on the seesaw as a
Yeah.
defender a little bit. But I just don't really know what the answer is. Like Jalen McDaniels, I think had the best plus minus on the team, and he probably had 3 or 4 record scratch moments where he had open shots last night and just had no interest in taking them. So like even the guys who you could look at the box score and say, "Hey, he played okay." The eye test tells me I don't think so, man. I don't think that guy was that good. And I don't think they've had good answers this entire series.
Well, and well, just a few more things, and then I know you have a big day, and I have a busy one too, so we'll wrap this up. But I think the answer is what it's always been in the last few playoff rounds. Somebody has to step up. Like somebody has to step up. Joel is giving you the most he can give you right now, and I think that's what's so amazing. It really dawned on me last night, and it's not new, but it really kind of set in watching. Joel has never gotten an out of body playoff performance from one of his teammates, right? We can say Jimmy Butler against Toronto. Jimmy was fine against Toronto. He averaged 22 points. Let's not act like he came out and averaged in the 30s, right? He wasn't good in game 5. He wasn't good in game 7. Ben Simmons, awful against the Hawks. Ben Simmons didn't even play against the Celtics in the bubble. Early on in his career, it almost feels like a different lifetime ago. But Joel has never had something where you leave a series and go, you know what? Joel was good, but they won this series because X really stepped up. Like, look at Denver, right? Jokic has advanced in the playoffs in the past because Jamal Murray has been unbelievable. Giannis wins a title because Drew Holiday and Chris Middleton step up and save him. And I think the most frustrating, like so on brand part is it could end up being that the only game they win this series is the one Joel didn't play in, right? Just because James was unbelievable in game 1. But it's like the second Joel takes the floor, and I'm not blaming him for this, but the second Joel takes the floor, James just becomes completely disinterested in trying to help him anymore. And it's just so frustrating that this deep in his career, you would think by luck he would get somebody that would have a performance in the playoffs where they far outperform what's expected of him. But he's never, ever gotten it. And so what can Doc do? Look, Doc has to be better. He has to figure out a better plan on defense, which I can't believe is coming out of my mouth, but he has to figure out a better plan on defense. But ultimately, everyone just has to hope that Harden and Maxey decide to play better. That's point blank all it's going to come down to. Are they going to play better? And if they don't, they might not win another game. If they can decide we're going to give you guys our B+ performances, then it's still a series because you win game 4. It's a best of 3. Who knows what happens? But it's hard to see that coming out. But the last thing I'll ask you is, and I think it has to be brought up, the officiating in the first half. We can blame Harden. We can blame the moment, all these things. The officiating in the first half was really bad. And as much as all the loose balls went against the Sixers, and that's on them, and as much as the offensive rebounds they let up, that's on them, there were lots of moments that did not go their way in the first half. The Melton 3 is not counted initially, right? And then as a result of that, Horford gets to make a 3 at the other end that he would not probably have gotten otherwise, right? The flagrant foul where Embiid gets pulled down, they don't get that call, right? It just felt like in a night where the Sixers played poorly and they deserve to lose that game, they could have had a chance if even one of these calls goes their way in the first half. And maybe that's one of those moments where they can break through. But I thought the officiating was really, really bad last night.
There are a couple of missed calls, but I didn't think it was fine. So all this stuff that people got actually mad about, like Grant Williams when he wrapped up Joel, great playoff foul, like textbook playoff foul that people were like, "Oh my god," they acted
I
like
don't
he
know, man.
committed assault with like a hammer or something. And then the one on Tobias where he gave a forearm to Robert Williams in the back on a lob,
Right.
the dumbest foul and the most obvious foul I've ever seen. Like
It was a foul. I agree with that. Yeah.
Robert Williams is not catching that ball. That was not getting it. There's no reason to even touch him. It was a
Yeah.
horrible pass. Let him go, and you're getting the turnover, and you're going the other way. So there are a lot of stuff like that. That was. I agree with you. There were some bad calls, but I think that's one where the crowd was so charged up to be mad at anything that went against the Sixers that was just like, yeah, Scott Foster, you stink. And it was like trying to re-channel their energy towards somebody that was not on the Sixers.
Well,
I
what
have
I've never
two.
understood is why fans boo and yell "ref, you suck" when they want calls. Like, you want calls. Like, I don't,
It's
they're
just they're
human
trying
at
to
the end of
find
the
a
day.
way to get their
I know, it's just
emotions
so
out.
funny that the ref's gonna be like, "All right, good point. You're literally booing me and saying I suck. Let me give you the benefit of the doubt from here on out."
So I have two thoughts to close the podcast, unless you have
No, I'm good.
anything
Go
more
ahead.
after this. So Jason Tatum came out and said last night that the MVP ceremony for Joel Embiid got him really ready to play.
Nice,
I
nice.
think I think it's really telling that the MVP ceremony was a better motivating factor for the Boston Celtics than it
Yeah,
was for any of Joel Embiid's teammates. Like
it's a great point.
that in itself is a great commentary on the game. The other thing, I think this game is a great example of exactly why all season we talked about the defensive backcourt pairing of Maxi and Harden and the potential for, and the months long experiment of DeAnthony Melton starting over Maxi. Because if you look at all those 50-50 balls and offensive rebounds and just the stuff that tilted in Boston's favor, it's not all of it, but some of it is like the guy who's in position to make one of those plays is Tyrese Maxey going against like Marcus Smart or
Yeah.
Grant Williams or just a bigger, more athletic guy and getting fucking bullied off the ball. And so on top of, look, I think if we're talking about him in like isolation, battling on defense, I actually think Tyrese has been better than I expected during these playoffs. He's done an okay job of, getting good contests in and not getting beat off the dribble as often as I would think. But I do think that, this is sort of the product of this kind of backcourt. Tyrese is a small, defensively challenged player playing next to maybe the most famously apathetic defensive player of the last, 10 to 15 years.
Yeah.
And when you get into the playoffs, and these guys have talked about it 100 times, when you're in the playoffs and every single possession counts, you need guys who manufacture extra possessions. That's why PJ Tucker is getting paid $10 million at just turned 38 years old
Mhm.
yesterday. And again, it's the same point I made with Harden earlier. Tyrese, when he's not going on offense, what is he bringing? The answer is nothing a lot
Yeah.
of the time. And worse with him, at least Harden is a pretty good playmaker even on a bad night. Tyrese is not getting other people involved. He's got to score or he's got not a lot to him. And so like they might end up later in the series, game 4, game 5, as long as it goes, they might have to make a choice and play DeAnthony Melton over Tyrese or play DeAnthony Melton over Tobias for that matter, because Tobias certainly isn't rebounding despite the size advantage that he has over DeAnthony. I don't know what the answer is, but I think a lot of the season long concerns that we had dating back to, training camp and when this roster was put together, they still exist right now. And I would be slightly leery of whatever Tyrese is going to get when his extension comes up. And
Yeah.
I think the second that he signs that deal, there are going to be a lot of people who maybe they don't look at him differently, but they scrutinize him a lot more closely than they are right now.
100%. And, there will be pods to be had where we discuss how much you make a decision based off this series alone. Because again, glass, I don't even want to say half full, but like glass 30% full. Like they are playing the best team in the NBA. They are. Like it's a fact, right? If they were playing the Knicks right now or the Heat, we're probably coming out and going, oh my God, they're going to get to the conference finals. And look how good Maxi's playing in the second round. And Harden's so there will be pods to discuss that. But you're right. Maxi, I know he's not Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum. I know he's not. But when you look at that's what an actual wing like scorer is. Like the things they do, Maxi cannot do. Maxi can't get to the basket that way. Maxi can't hold the offense on his shoulders that way. Maxi scores by taking 3-pointers and by like scoring in transition, and every once in a while he'll get to the rim, but he's not a max player. And that will be something hopefully we're not discussing for a few more weeks. After last night, it feels like we might as well just do the postseason pod now, but it's not over yet.
Oh,
They win on Sunday, and things again, it's like you said, when you lose in the playoff, when you win in the playoffs, it feels like you'll never lose again. And when you lose, it feels like you'll never win again. So they win on Sunday, we'll feel much different about it. But Kyle, this has been about as fun as a pod about this game could possibly be. The Sixers, like you said, Sunday afternoon, we'll have a pod after that, I would assume, either late Sunday night or early Monday morning. Hopefully talking about a win, hopefully getting back to believing in this team and feeling like this year can be different. But until then, I'll talk to you next time, man.
see you guys soon.